of our annual Central Europe Week conference. The Atlantic Council has been doing Central Europe Week conference for 6 years now. We do this with a series of events in Washington and mirror them with events in a selected group of states in Central Europe. This year, we're doing it in Vilnius, Warsaw, and Prague. This is the Warsaw section of the conference. We do this because we would like to foster a dynamic relation between the Central Europe and the United States and elevate voices from Central Europe to tackle some of the most challenging main challenges that we have in the world today. To kick us off, I am delighted to introduce a great American and a great friend of Poland, Mark Brzezinski, Ambassador of the United States to Poland. Please, Ambassador, the floor is yours.
Nice introduction. Thank you so much. Thank you, Aaron. Thank you, terrific Atlantic Council. I have to say full disclosure. My amazing brother, Ian Brzezinski, is a fellow at the Atlantic Council. I couldn't be more proud of him. And so he's not here today in this room, but it's one of the reasons why I love coming to the Atlantic Council's offices and to its events. Thank you so much, Atlantic Council, for hosting this event. Thank you, Atlantic Council and Atlantic Council Warsaw, for using your power to convene over the last few years to address some of the most pressing strategic questions confronting the U.S.-Polish relationship. Think tanks germinate ideas that in a year or so become policy. There was a great need for that in this part of the world. The Atlantic Council stepped up. I can't think of a more Atlantist challenge than what we have collectively faced in Ukraine. The Atlantic Council met the moment here and everywhere. Congratulations. We value and appreciate your vital work. It is an honor to address you as we reflect on the strong and enduring relationship that exists between Poland and the United States today. Our two nations share a unity of purpose, a shared definition of the challenge, a deep friendship, and a steadfast dedication to transatlantic values. Before we discuss the future, and as I reflect on my time here as President Biden's personal representative, I'd like to share with you just a few of our accomplishments. Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine and its shocking aggression against Ukraine has been a call to action for the West. Our collective response in this part of the world has been historic. U.S.-Polish cooperation has been pivotal to preserving Ukraine's sovereignty and independence. The role of Rzeszów, of Jastrzębie Airport, the role of the Poles going to the 8 border crossings that separate the 380-mile border between Poland and Ukraine will be remembered in the history books as an absolute lifeline for the Ukrainian people. Our defense and security cooperation has reached unprecedented levels. We now have the first ever permanent U.S. military installation in Poland, the U.S. Army 5th Corps Forward Command Headquarters in Poznan. And I have a feeling of deja vu when I say that because I was a Fulbright scholar in Poland 32 years ago in the early 1990s, and you could still hear the Soviet troops on the streets of Krakow on their morning jogs. Now we have the first U.S. Army permanent military installation in Poland. For centuries, Poland has waited for the West to join its struggle for security and freedom. Camp K in Poznan, or Camp Kościuszko, as it's known in Poznan, is finally the answer to that. I'm so proud of President Biden for that historic decision to put the first permanent installation there. Poles waited a long time for that. We also sustained thousands more rotational troops in Poland, more than ever before. At one point during my tenure here, we had over 13,500 troops here in Poland. We have signed billions of dollars worth of defense deals to ensure Poland has the finest military equipment, F-35s, Abrams tanks, Apaches, HIMARS. That military equipment is interoperable with the U.S. military for decades to come. Our support to Ukraine in its defense against Russia's full-scale assault is a demonstration of democratic unity and transatlantic partnership. Putin wanted to divide Europe, but instead he united it, and NATO gained 2 new members, Sweden and Finland. Poland's ongoing commitment to Ukraine and to strengthening NATO's eastern flank is proof positive that collective defense works. Who knew 25 years ago, when NATO was being enlarged to include Poland, that collective defense would work? That was a risk that those supporting NATO enlargement took as they argued for this. I feel that this is truly one of the underreported things in the news today, the fact that collective defense has worked so amazingly in this part of the world. Please remember, Poland is a Slavic country. Russia and Ukraine are Slavic countries. What Poland is doing, in essence, giving the guns to the Ukrainians to defend themselves against Russia, in the mind of Putin, a KGB agent who is the son of a KGB agent, is treason. That's treason in the mind of Putin, and there's only one result in the mind of a KGB officer for an act of treason. And yet, Poland is safe and secure. Polska jest bezpieczna I Polska jest zabezpieczona. Together, our 2 countries have provided billions of dollars in lethal and non-lethal assistance to Ukraine, enabling the Ukrainian people to defend themselves. We supported Poland as it received millions of refugees from Ukraine, some 1 million of whom currently reside in Poland. The United States, through PRM and other sources, conveyed hundreds of millions of dollars to support what the Poles were doing to help the refugees. But be advised, this was a diffuse embrace by the Poles. Ukrainian families were brought into people's homes and apartments. And we don't send checks to individual families. This was taken on the shoulders of these individual families. We say thank you to the Polish people for their kindness and hospitality. Since February 2022, U.S. Mission Poland has hosted President Biden twice, Vice President Harris once, more than half the U.S. cabinet, and over 220 members of Congress. By way of comparison, when I was ambassador to Sweden for 4 years, I hosted 6 members of Congress in Stockholm. There's over 220 members of Congress in Poland. This demonstrates the depth and bipartisan nature of the U.S. commitment to Poland and regional security and underscores Poland's vital role as a linchpin of European security. I also want to highlight the joint visit by President Duda and Prime Minister Tusk to Washington in March of this year to the Oval Office to meet with President Biden, to mark the 25th anniversary of the expansion of NATO. These are political rivals. When the idea was first hatched with them, frankly, no one embraced it. Both were there in the Oval Office with President Biden because some things supersede politics. It sent a powerful message that Poland's leaders are united on security policy across the political spectrum, and the historic visit highlighted the strength and importance of the bilateral relationship. We have also furthered Poland's energy security. We started the process of building Poland's first nuclear power plant. Poland was one of only 2 countries coming out of the 26 countries of the former Soviet bloc that had no nuclear power plants. Sweden, at 9.5 million people, has 6 nuclear power plants. Poland, at 40 million people, has no nuclear power plants. By partnering with the U.S. government and selecting Westinghouse Bechtel, Poland has launched a century of bilateral cooperation to enhance energy security, improve economic competitiveness, and deliver on our climate commitments. In 2022, the Bechtel-Westinghouse deal with Poland, $30 billion deal, was the largest single transaction any U.S. embassy in the world facilitated. We encourage Poland to take advantage of the economic efficiencies by also selecting Westinghouse Bechtel team for the second 3 reactors that are being teed up here in Poland. Lastly, we have worked together to ensure that fundamental freedoms, such as rule of law, media freedom, equal treatment, underpin our bilateral relationship. As both Poles and Americans know, freedom and democracy are not guaranteed, must be constantly renewed. These values bring stability, security, prosperity, and the promise of a brighter future. The civic mobilization of Poles to support democracy on October 15th, 2023 was profoundly impressive. As I prepare to depart on January 20th, I want to assure you that there will be a seamless transition at the U.S. Embassy in Warsaw. I've had the privilege of working with an amazing DCM here in Warsaw, Dan Lawton, who has decades and decades of experience, a man of tremendous IQ and EQ. He has been a truly awesome DCM. He will step up as Chargé d'Affaires upon my departure on January 20th. I'll leave when President Biden leaves. Dan brings a wealth of experience from his time in Washington and his 2.5 years here in Poland. I hope you will continue to partner with him as you have with me. I know that today's topic for the panel discussion with Ambassador Fried, Paula Dobriański, and Sławomir Dębski is navigating 2025 and beyond. Will the U.S. meet the moment? I'm sure the answer is a resounding yes. The Polish-American relationship in 2025 and beyond is poised to deepen further with continued collaboration on defense and security, particularly through NATO. Both nations will continue to enhance their economic ties, focusing on energy such as nuclear power and renewables. Additionally, the commitment to shared democratic values and human rights will remain a cornerstone of their bilateral relationship, fostering stability and prosperity in the region. In closing, if you read the news, you'll see that being teed up are potentially some really important decisions pertaining to this part of the world. It'll be important for the Poles to be able, not just to want to, but to be able to have their voice heard at the table. Thank you once again for your collaboration, your friendship, and your unwavering commitment to shared values and goals. Together, we will continue to build a stronger, more secure, and prosperous future for both America and Poland. Thank you all.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's great to be here. My name is Rachel Rizzo, and I'm a non-resident senior fellow here at the Atlantic Council's Europe Center, and it's such an honor to be with you all today. As Ambassador Brzezinski said, the name of this panel is Navigating 2025 and Beyond. Will the U.S. meet the moment? And what a moment it seems to be. We had a hotly contested and consequential election in the United States just a month ago. Although it seems like it's been longer, the new administration is going to face urgent challenges, continued Russian aggression against Ukraine, the rise of protectionist measures, China's play for hegemony in the Indo-Pacific, wars in the Middle East, the profound threat posed by climate change. And I think what's clear in all of this is just how important U.S.-Europe leadership, the U.S.-Polish relationship will be. And I think we have a perfect panel today to talk about these many issues. To my left, we have Ambassador Daniel Fried, the Weiser Family Distinguished Fellow at the Atlantic Council, and needs no introduction here, former U.S. Ambassador to Poland, among many other titles held. Ambassador Paula Dobriański, Vice Chair of the Scowcroft Center for Strategy and Security at the Atlantic Council, former Undersecretary of State for Global Affairs, Senior Fellow at Harvard Kennedy's Belfer Center. We have Dr. Sławomir Dębski, who is the visiting professor of strategy and international relations at the College of Europe in Natolin. And then, of course, Ambassador Kurt Volker, former U.S. ambassador to NATO and distinguished fellow at the Center for European Policy Analysis. So we have a live audience here, but we also have people tuned in online to watch this event. We have about 45 minutes, so I think we'll have a conversation up here, and I want it to be sort of a back and forth conversation. We're all friends. Everyone here, I think, has known each other for quite some time. But I also want to come both to the audience and online. So if you're watching online, go to askac.org and ask your questions. Lisa, our colleague, will text them to me. That's why I have my phone. It's not to play on my phone during the conversation, but it's so that Lisa can give me those questions. So again, askac.org. So Ambassador Dobriansky, I wanted to start with you and kind of give us a big picture overview of what this moment means. As we mentioned, the title of this panel, Navigating the 2025 and Beyond, Will the U.S. Meet the Moment? We have a new president, a new president who will be in his second term. So can you talk a little bit about what this moment means in the United States, but also what it means for Europe?
Okay. Well, first, let me say thank you to the Atlantic Council. I'm part of the Atlantic Council, but for putting this together, and Aaron, to you, the team, also from Washington, just congratulations. And it's also very delightful being here and seeing a number of familiar faces who I haven't seen for quite some time. So thank you for coming. Ambassador Brzezinski posed the question. Well, let me give the answer very simply. It's yes. The United States definitely will meet the moment. And the way I'd like to take your question, the direction I'd like to take, is to look at what this means for U.S.-Polish relationships, because we are here in Warsaw. I could look at it more broadly. But I'd like to say that I think it's a time of great opportunity. The relationship has been strong for decades. We've endured a lot. We have held together a lot in many different sectors, and we will continue to go on. But let me, in 5 quick points, mention the ways in which I see important opportunity for us and for the future of the transatlantic relationship at large. The first is the Trump administration has said very clearly that the terms used are, I'm going to start with peace through strength, which is a term that's well used and well known because it was well used during Ronald Reagan's presidency. And it is peace through strength. What does that mean? It does mean an emphasis on striving for peace and doing so in a way in which you're operating from a very sound economic, military, and political base. And in that sense, that's been the very strong commitment of, as stated by the Trump administration. And by the way, I do want to say, I'm stating this, but I don't speak for the Trump administration. This is what has been very clearly put forward. You also know the term America First. And I just simply want to say on my first point, America First means America First domestically. Looking at all of the issues put forth by Americans, infrastructure, all kinds of questions, education, all kinds of issues that have bearing on our communities. It does not mean America alone, and it does not mean isolationism. So here, the opportunity is, clearly, I know Poland, and Poland is about peace through strength. Poland has put forward 4.7% in terms of its defense spending. We match our goals and our objectives in that context. And as Ambassador Brzezinski, I think, very clearly articulated, need I say more about the military, the scale and the scope of not only military acquisition here, but the scale and the scope of military collaboration. So I see that going forward. Second, let me mention China, if I may. I mention China because that has been front and center. It's definitely front and center for the Trump administration in terms of concern about China not accepting and abiding by international rules. China also investing heavily militarily, and also, as we know, actual statements about its desire to aggress militarily against Taiwan and/or a blockade. And in this context, why does it matter? It matters greatly. I don't think that Poland will decouple. You have your own ties, we have our ties, but it's de-risking. And in that sense, I think there's collaboration of effort. And I'm going to expand that one to also point out there's a lot of talk now about China, Russia, Iran, and North Korea. I was at the Halifax Security Forum, and they came up with the acronym there, CRINCS. They added the S. So for this collaboration, I think that Poland and Poland's administration has really focused on this. You're not only looking at your own region, but Poland has, I think, looked at more broadly the kind of interrelationships here, because what's key here and where we have opportunity, we're on the same page that what happens in the war against Ukraine has ramifications for the Indo-Pacific. And even as stated very clearly by the former Japanese Prime Minister who came and spoke to our Congress, he said this outright: the fate of Ukraine affects the fate of the Indo-Pacific. And just a couple more, energy. I want to mention energy because Poland has been certainly a very strong leader. The staunch position you took on Nord Stream 2, and not only that, but I remember when Trump visited in his first term here, he came and he spoke and embraced the 3 Seas initiative, of which Poland has advanced, and that whole issue of diversification. Trump has been very clear about, as we say, opening up the spigots, LNG. You have an LNG terminal. Interestingly enough, your neighbor had to build one. I'm talking about the neighbor to the west in this case. So that's definitely a key area of collaboration. And certainly another one is just the economy. I was struck by the figures. 1,700 American businesses. I mean, it's pretty substantial in terms of our investment in you, and I think your investment in us. So there's great opportunity as well in this particular domain. So forgive me for a little bit longer opener, but I wanted to indicate that the answer is yes in terms of the moment, and I think it depends also on both parties in this case. And I think there's already a very, very strong foundation from which to spring from which to move forward. So I'm, in that regard, very optimistic.
Thank you so much. I wanted to come to Ambassador Fried, but also Dr. Dembski to sort of build out the Poland and Central Europe aspect of this conversation. There's 2 sides of this coin, a U.S. side and a Polish side. So Ambassador Fried, how are you thinking, or how do you think that Trump and his team, to the extent that we know, are thinking about the relationship both with Central Europe, but Poland specifically? And how are people in Poland thinking about this new presidency and the incoming administration? So Ambassador Fried, I'll start with you, and then Dr. Dembski, I'll come to you.
I'm in essential agreement with Paula. She gave, by her own admission, the optimistic version. There are other versions, but so far, the evidence suggests that the optimistic variant of what the Trump administration will do strategically is the dominant one. So far. May not be that way, but so far, there's a case for it. That case and the challenge of Putin's aggression against Ukraine and against Europe will test that proposition very quickly. Trump says he wants to arrange an end to the war. This can be done in a way that could be catastrophic for Ukraine and for European security, or in a way that's actually pretty reasonable. I am more hopeful now than I was a few months ago because Keith Kellogg has been appointed the special envoy for Ukraine and Russia, and Keith Kellogg's interviews have been getting better, and better, I think, than his article last spring, which was okay. But his interviews are getting tougher and stronger. But the Trump team will be put to the test. And this will be because Putin shows absolutely no signs of genuinely engaging with the Trump administration on anything except Putin's maximalist terms. But don't take my word for it. Read what Dmitry Trenin said about 2 days ago in an article where he said, yeah, if Kellogg wants to come to Moscow, Putin could receive him, and he will have to throw out Trump's ideas and accept Putin's. In other words, he can come and kneel before the throne of the Tsar. I don't think Kellogg will appreciate that. And the question is, how does Donald Trump react? This will happen very quickly. You asked about Poland. Well, Poland has political credibility in the United States generally and in Trump world in particular. You have a president with a pre-existing good relationship with Trump. You have military spending which is high, and the Trump people regard Poland as the good European, the model European. This is an opportunity. Plus, the Polish government is very adept at working with the Americans. Radek Sikorski has great experience in working the Americans, including with the right. And there seems to be a pretty good division of labor between the government and the presidency, politics aside. So I think that President Duda can play a role. But if Trump pushes for a near-term settlement of the Ukraine war, Russia's war against Ukraine, this will force Europe to make a lot of quick decisions and very difficult ones. And it'll also be a test for Trump. And Poland's influence will be important. And I hope it plays that role. Also there's plenty more to discuss, but you asked about the role of Central Europe, and Poland is in a position to play a leadership role. That's the good news. The bad news is it's a leadership role under bad conditions that the Poles warned us about 30 years ago, right? I'm looking at Janusz Onaszkiewicz, but I remember what Radek Sikorski said, and we know what Lech Wałęsa said, both to President George H.W. Bush and to President Clinton, where he warned Clinton, if you don't move on NATO enlargement, the Russians will be back and there will be a war. And the war he warned about 30 years ago is the war we've got in Ukraine right now. The Poles were right and are known to have been right. And now is a moment for Polish leadership in Europe, working with the new administration, and the opportunities are there, so are the dangers.
Thank you, Ambassador Fried. And I will come back to the Ukraine question, certainly. Dr. Dembski, over to you.
Thank you very much. First of all, thank you for your invitation. It is always a great pleasure and honor to sit in such a wonderful panel among such wonderful, great friends and experts. My first point is that I'm not going to speak on behalf of Trump administration. No, any other administration. So what I'm going to share with you, it's just my own thinking. First, 2 points about issues which are persistent no matter which administration is running foreign policy of the United States. First, Poland is a success story of U.S. foreign policy. Perhaps one of the most spectacular in the last 30 years. United States failed in Middle East, failed in the Central Asia, but definitely succeeded in Central Europe. And Poland is the hallmark of this success. Exactly for that reason, each president of the United States were coming to Warsaw to give major speech. And that was Donald Trump in 2017, who came to Warsaw and delivered, I think, the best speech on foreign policy during his first term. President Biden traveled to Warsaw twice. So one may expect that also Donald Trump would appear in Warsaw, perhaps near the Warsaw Castle or around Warsaw Uprising Museum to deliver his message and his vision on foreign policy. And I'm looking forward for that. Poland is a great place to deliver such a message for two reasons. First, no matter which administration is running foreign policy of the United States, Poland is and remain the pivotal country on the NATO eastern flank. We are spending a lot. We are preparing ourselves to the troubled times. We are aware of Russian aggressive intentions, and these intentions would not go away, no matter what policy of Donald Trump is going to pursue. And we are neighboring Russia, Belarus, and Ukraine. Donald Trump, during his campaign, said a number of times that he is interested in peace. He wants to act as a middleman, perhaps, or just offer the kind of division of peace. No peace is actually feasible, in my view, without Poland. Poland, as I said, neighboring country to Ukraine, neighboring country to Russia and Belarus. If any kind of settlement is agreed, Poland would serve either as a logistic hub or an actor in offering wider scheme. Now there is a lot of talks about how this scheme may look like, but I think there is we don't have any clear vision of how to bring Russia to the negotiation table, how this settlement may look like. So I think there is no need to engage into some hypothetical considerations. But few things has to be stated very clearly, in my view. First, we are not going to jump to the kind of empty pool. So Poland would definitely, and Poles, the Polish voters, would definitely need to know what kind of settlement is going to be shaped, what role of United States are going to be in the settlement, how the other NATO countries are going to contribute to this settlement, and in the end of the day, how Donald Trump is going to reshape our institutional order of the world. I believe that he's going to do that. I believe that my advice would be not to establish new institutions, but to change existing ones. It would serve American interests much better. Pre-seized initiative is definitely the initiative which survived by the administration. It was initiated by Donald Trump. So it could be a good vehicle for Polish-American relationship in the future.
Thank you. Ambassador Volker, I'm going to come to you. We've already touched on the Ukraine question a little bit, and I'd like to invite the other panelists to jump in on this as well, because it's something that we've been discussing certainly here, but also for the last few weeks after Trump was elected. I think there's always been this assumption or this fear that the election of Donald Trump would mean the demise of Ukraine. And I've always been sort of skeptical of that view for various reasons. But I wanted to get your take on this. As former U.S. ambassador to NATO, you've been steeped in these conversations. You've been steeped in conversations about Ukraine. How do you think that the Trump team is thinking about this seemingly intractable conflict? Where do you think the different polls, I guess, in the Trump camp are kind of pushing and pulling on this topic? And where do you think that we can expect, or to the extent that you can, read a crystal ball, what are you expecting over the coming months?
Right. Well, thanks, Rachel, and thanks for having me here and such a great panel. I'm going to make a couple general points first and then get to your specifics. General points is that I think that 2025 is shaping up to look like it's going to be a pretty good year. It's too early to say. Things can always go wrong, but it seems like a lot of things that have been stuck are now moving. And even some bad actors are reacting preemptively to the fact that Trump is going to be in office. And I'll take the example of Iran and the Middle East. Iran is anticipating that there will be a return to a policy of maximum pressure. And that includes the idea of threatening direct strikes on Iran if they have their proxies attacking Israel or American interests. And as a result, we've seen things moving now. We've seen a ceasefire with Hezbollah, and Hezbollah pulling back from the Israeli border, allowing the Lebanese armed forces in. We've seen progress towards a ceasefire with Hamas, not there yet, but progress toward that. And all of these strike me as indicators that Iran knows that it wants to calm these things down before Trump takes office. In the case of Ukraine, and let's turn to that one now, I think we already are seeing signs that Putin knows a deal is coming. He doesn't want it. He wants to have a maximum position, as Dan said, a maximal position of everything that he wants. He wants to overthrow the government, denazify, demilitarize, all of that. But I think he realizes that he's going to have to take a pause in the hot phase of the war. Now, why do I say that? I think there are a couple of reasons. One, he knows that Trump is going to be pushing hard on this. Two, his economy is worsening, and he knows it. And he's got a limited period of time in which he can continue to draw down his hard currency reserves to keep things functioning. Might be a year, might be a year and a half. Anders Östlund estimates a year and a half. But he knows that's coming, so you don't want to get to that point. You have to wind something down before that. Inflation is very troubling in Russia right now. It's probably over 30% and rising, and interest rates are currently 21%, and the ruble has been falling again. And there's a labor shortage, which means price pressure will continue. And he sees that President Trump is going to be increasing U.S. energy production and exports, as Paula said, which will drive down global energy prices, which will have an impact on his budget as well. And it gives Trump the freedom to use sanctions, meaningful sanctions on Russian energy if he chooses to. And sanctions would be a more likely tool for a Trump administration than just military. So I think Putin can see all that on the economic side. On the military side, he has really doubled down to a point that he's really weakened the Russian military. He couldn't defend Kursk and keep attacking in Ukraine at the same time. So he chose to keep attacking and fall back some ground inside Russia. He doesn't want to go to conscription. And so they are burning through up to 1,500 soldiers a day in this fighting for minimal gains. And that's a rate of attrition that they can't sustain. He brought in some North Koreans to fight, presumably in Kursk. But the numbers that we've heard, say 12,000, that's replacing 2 weeks' worth of Russian soldiers. That's not a significant change. He's dependent on artillery shells from North Korea. About 2/3 come from North Korea. He can't produce what he needs on his own right now. He's dependent on drones coming from Iran or manufactured in Russia on an Iranian license. He is seeing that Iran is getting pushed back. He just lost the Assad regime in Syria, which was a safe harbor for Russian bases there, and will probably end up having to withdraw those bases. So he sees on the economic side and the military side a weakening position, and he knows he's going to get pushed. So I think if the Trump administration is smart and steady, they can probably push for an end to a hot phase of the conflict in 2025. It's something that Zelensky has very carefully been aligning himself with. If you look at the interview he gave for Sky News, He's also apparently talking about a new, more what do you say, more tailored peace plan. He met with Trump and Macron in Paris this past weekend. It looks like he is very much in alignment with where Trump wants to go. In fact, Trump's tweets over the weekend said that Zelensky's ready to negotiate. It's Vladimir's turn. So that is, I'd say, looking positive as well. The big challenge will be if Trump is successful in getting an end to the fighting, how do you turn that into a permanent peace in Europe? And that is where I don't think they have a plan for that yet. It's where Poland can play a role in helping to shape thinking about that. Italy can do that as well. Merz in Germany can do that as well. So I think that will be the test. And I would simply hope that all of us understand that even if we have an end to the hot phase of military conflict, Putin will not change his objectives. He will still want to undermine and take over Ukraine, and he will use hybrid means just as he is doing in other countries right now. So we need to take advantage of that time of an end to the hot phase of the war to really lean in and make sure that Ukraine gets on its feet quickly, economically, politically, with its democracy, with reforms, with EU membership, and I would argue NATO membership, because despite all of the searching for alternatives, none of the alternatives are credible to Putin, and I don't think would deter future war the way that NATO membership would.
Okay, I think that's a good kind of kicking off point to come to Ambassador Dobryansky and Ambassador Fried. If there's anything that you want to pick up on from what Ambassador Volker said, but also you ended on the exact question that I wanted to ask, which was about NATO membership. It seems like we keep getting caught up on this question, whether or not you could get 32 NATO members to agree on this at consensus. Does anything short of NATO membership hold the same sort of weight that NATO membership does? And it seems like the answer to that question is a resounding no, but that might be where we end up. So I might ask both of you to sort of pick up on those points and the easy questions, obviously.
Shall I go first? Or you want to go first? I feel like you're ready to just say it. Okay,
Paula and
go
I,
ahead.
okay. Paula and I worked together in the 90s when I was in the Clinton administration, and she was one of the Republicans pushing us from outside on NATO membership for Poland. The issues we dealt with then are exactly the ones we're dealing with now, but under far worse conditions, because it's a war. And the Biden people hated talk about NATO membership for Ukraine, except that they couldn't think of anything better. And they were dragged toward it by the logic of European security. That doesn't mean that the Trump people will come out in the same place. But the point that Kurt made is exactly right. All the alternatives to NATO membership are less good than NATO membership. And that space between NATO and less than NATO is the space into which Vladimir Putin will run. Now, skeptics will say there's no way to get it done. You have Orban will veto it, maybe the Turks, maybe the Slovaks, maybe the Germans just aren't ready for it. And all of those are very valid points. That's all true. The obstacles are severe. And it doesn't matter what I say. We may end up with some weaker alternative to NATO membership, but we should be very clear-eyed about the issues and not give up prematurely and not let Viktor Orban jerk NATO around. Now, I don't know how the Trump administration will come out, and this is a critical issue. And I don't know how we keep Ukraine secure in a period of X months or years until Ukraine joins NATO, when there is a ceasefire and Russia hasn't changed its views. So that's a danger, and we will need Polish help thinking about this.
I wanted to make, before I comment on NATO, just your question was with the different options or voices on options with regard to Ukraine, how does this all shake down? As you asked that, I was thinking, well, there might be different voices, but where they're, I'd say, relevant to the incoming administration, a constant that I do see, an important constant, is the desire for peace. Okay? That's actually not just a small point. It really isn't. Really an active desire to strive to find a peaceful solution here. There are differences as to how to achieve it, and also what will constitute the specifics, of course. But I wanted to mention that because actually that was an important element during the actual campaign in the United States about the investments that the United States makes in terms of its own blood and treasure in conflicts abroad. So there's a real desire to bring that to a close. But I'd also like to think, and I believe here, that it's not peace at any cost. And secondly, I do want to mention the importance of aid, because that's been out in the news. And on this, Trump himself has addressed this and has been quoted as being a supporter of Lend-Lease. If you're familiar with Lend-Lease, it is a continuation of aid to Ukraine, but the difference is it has to be paid back, what is offered. And that's been a kind of parameter which we've also seen in terms of the issue of NATO and burden sharing. So let me segue to that. I want to begin first by saying the other day, Monday, I interviewed the former Foreign Minister of Ukraine, Dmytro Kuleba. He was in the United States, and he was speaking at the Council on Foreign Relations, and it was on the record. And I did ask him about the peace plan. And the part that he underscored as being the most crucial was NATO, in terms of the issue of NATO, and NATO not at all being taken off the table, or not at all being accepted as, no to Ukraine, or that Ukraine has to sign some or codify it in its constitution. No, never. He really emphasized, and I wanted to share that because I also think as part of this process, certainly the voice of Ukraine matters greatly in one's overall calculations. And I think Ukrainians, not just only Kuleba, but others, have been very specific, no less Zelensky, in terms of his points. My own view, I think, is certainly I support what Kurt said and Dan said. I think that that is a crucial piece because when I look at it and step back, what do Ukrainians say? Ukrainians talk about the Budapest Memorandum, I think you know this, and say, why did we give up nuclear weapons? And what kind of security guarantee do we have going forward? So that's going to be a very, very important piece here. And in terms of deterrent, and you said it, going back to Poland and the time I was thinking, we have Janusz Januszkiewicz here. I remember for Dan and myself when Jan Jeziorański was at our doorstep and twisting our arms and saying, you must bring Poland into NATO, and then it went on to the Baltic states and therefrom. So simply put, in conclusion, NATO is a crucial piece here, and for Ukraine, and not just for Ukraine, the question is what provides the most significant deterrent for future Russian aggression in this case, and continued aggression against Ukraine, no less others. And that certainly is NATO.
Thank you. Before we go to the audience, I'll come to both of you. You've been holding your mics patiently.
Yes.
But I do want to come to the audience for questions after this, so please get them ready. We'll have a few minutes at the end.
So there is only one security arrangement which can be seen as an alternative to NATO in Europe. But it works for the countries either sitting inside of Europe, like Austria or Switzerland, or those far away of Russian borders, like Ireland. For all others, only NATO works. That's for sure. My second point is, I don't think that anybody can veto Trump and his policy. Viktor Orban was unable to veto Joe Biden. So if there is a clear Trump's policy on Ukraine in NATO, no one is going to stop him. Of course, we are far away from this, but as there is no other arrangement which may bring peace to Ukraine than NATO, and there is a consensus about that. All other are some substitute which would not work. Sooner or later we will come back to this issue, because NATO countries, including the United States under Bush administration, and Dan Fried was in Bucharest, so he can support my point. Ukraine was promised to become a NATO member, and actually Angela Merkel, in her memoirs, says that it was her who blocked, granting NATO membership to Ukraine already then. Well, even if he's going farther, she's going farther. She says that she blocked Ukraine's perspective to become a member of NATO, and she regards this policy as still valid and a good one.
Well, thanks for that reminder, which is really troubling. That if you don't have regrets over that, then you really have no self-reflection at all. I did want to highlight, thank you, Slavo, for mentioning, you went through a series of U.S. presidential speeches that were given in Poland, but you left out one of the most important ones, which was the Baltic to the Black Sea speech by George W. Bush, which, of course, Dan is largely responsible for. So well done, Dan. I think the one point I want to make on this NATO for Ukraine topic is that I think people have not looked at it through the lens of securing the peace and preventing the next war. When we talk about it, people are thinking we have to fight the war. There's an ongoing war. Article 5 applies. We'll have NATO troops fighting Russia. Maybe the risk of a nuclear exchange. That's what people think of when we talk about NATO membership for Ukraine right now. We have to put ourselves in the mindset of there being an end to fighting, and now our job is to prevent the next war.
I think that's a great kickoff for audience questions. We have a few minutes, so just keep them quick. I think, okay, there's a lot, so keep them very quick. I might start over here. There were a couple. Just introduce yourself quickly and just make sure that it ends in a question mark. That would be great. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Jakub Graca,
Yeah, I'll
the
take a few
Institute
to
of New
start.
Europe. I have a question to all the panelists. Are you optimistic with regards to Trump's personal policy? Because if Trump has his way, we're going to see one day photos from the Situation Room with Mike Waltz and Marco Rubio at one side of the table with huge experience or a significant experience in national security, and on the other side, for example, Pete Hegseth and Tulsi Gabbard. Thank you very much.
I'll take a few before we move on. Who, sir? Yes.
Janusz Onyszkiewicz. We talk about peace settlement, and there are all sorts of elements: security guarantees, presence of NATO troops on the border. But what about sanctions? Lifting sanctions would give Russia tremendous opportunity to rebuild its capability. So I think that this is a very serious issue, and it is somehow missing in our debate.
Konrad Szymański. Apart from security concerns we have here in Poland and in Central Europe, we have also concerns about the trade and economic cooperation with the new administration. Poland would like to do something good for sure, with a good reputation, authority, and good record. But 20% tariffs imposed on European goods and services means enormous mess in Brussels. And of course, we want to reduce it or navigate or neutralize these problems. Have you any idea what to do to avoid this negative scenario?
Hi, Peter Eric, Fellow Bank, and also University of Warsaw. My question is connected with what Sławomir said, so about Germany. We're going to have elections in Germany very soon, probably a more powerful German chancellor coming into office, more powerful coalition government, a grand coalition, most probably, and a country which is the slowest developing European economy and also the biggest European economy in the last years. So Germany grew just less than 1% since 2017. This means tremendous pressure on having access to German gas, to Russian gas, which is going to be probably one of the elements of the negotiations.
Thank you. Irina Krasnoshtan, I'm from Ukraine. I have two concerns. One of them is basically that there is a lot of talks about what kind of compromises Ukraine should take, but not that much about what Russia should compromise. So what, in your opinion, should be the compromises that Russia should be pushed into? And the second one is that of concern to me is that Trump's administration and Trump himself may believe that pushing Ukraine is a cheaper and easier option than pushing Russia. So how should we persuade them that the other way around is more efficient? Thank you.
Hi, Dave DeBenedetto. An extension and more like a precise element of that question exactly. NATO is nothing without Article 5. Article 5 is nothing without NATO. And exactly on those negotiations, is it possible to import some conditionality? If there's going to be territorial concessions, then how can you have Article 5? How can you declare Article 5 event? And the second, totally unrelated question, I'm just wondering how the panelists have changed their views since the elephant in the room of Syria this past week. We only had a slight comment about Syria, but that seemed to be a complete game changer in the strength of Russia, the strength of Iran, and the willingness to support one of their client states.
Thank you. So I think that's a whole slew of questions: Germany, sanctions, personnel, policy, trade and econ, Russian compromises, Syria. So I might offer the panelists a chance to answer either or any of those questions and offer, and then if there's any closing remarks you'd like to make as well. So Ambassador Fried, I'll give it to you.
Don't negotiate Ukraine's fate with Russia. Kropka. NATO is not on the table. It is not their damn business. Okay? That's my personal view. Be careful about any sanctions lifting. Putin will insist on lifting all of them. Trump shouldn't do it. Certainly do not send high-tech exports back to Russia. Secondly, keep the pressure on Russian energy. That's good for U.S. business. That's an argument that might appeal to Trump, right? Don't let Germany fall for cheap Russian gas. Again, provide U.S. gas. Trump wants to increase U.S. natural gas production and LNG exports, so it's good business for the United States and good security for Germany. As for economic relations, look, it could end up with a disaster, but there are areas where in certain sectors the EU and US may be able to cooperate. Energy cooperation, high-tech export controls, supply chain issues, China, and basically the Trump team hopefully will decide that working with Europe to deal with the China problem is better policy than wrestling with everybody all at once. All right, quick answers, but it's a big panel.
Thank you. Yep.
I agree with his answer to you. To keep it very succinct, 100% yes on sanctions. And by the way, just to tell you, although that wasn't mentioned right here, that is something that is said all the time, at least by many in the foreign policy and national security community in the United States, in reinforcing that. That's very much on the table. By the way, on personnel, I'll take yours. By the way, I'm going to take your question, though, about the people who Trump selected, if I may, because I'm assuming that's kind of what you meant. In that case, I think you have a number of players who definitely, you mentioned Waltz, you mentioned Rubio, in terms of their positions. Their positions are very supportive of the agenda that Trump has put forward during the campaign. A very clear focus on China, a desire to secure peace. They will have their own to bring to the table. Rubio, certainly in terms of Latin America, in terms of Waltz on Afghanistan. He's been very vocal on the issue of Afghanistan. And by the way, I was sharing before to our colleagues here on Pete Hegseth, the president, the incoming president, Trump, gave an interview in which he was asked about him, and he was extremely supportive of him. And the latest report says his nomination is going forward. So I think there you will see someone who was appointed to bring a new look at reordering, if you will, and downsizing the Pentagon. I do want to say Syria, because that one Dan didn't tackle. I liked what Kuleba said. Kuleba said in the CFR meeting, I tweeted a week before all of this happened that Putin, it was going to be very clear that Putin was going to throw Assad under the bus. And bottom line, why? Because, yes, he is desperate for resources and assistance in Ukraine. And so, of course, in this case, I think that just underscores where Russia is in terms of its desperateness and dire situation. Has that changed? I think we knew that, but I think that's come to the forefront of the global community in this case.
Well, I've read somewhere that if someone looks up from the window of the Oval Room, the White House, he sees the whole globe. So it means that Middle East, Russia, China would be interconnected areas for any president of the United States, including Donald Trump. So from that point of view, Russia is losing ground. Actually, what Putin may offer to Trump to support his plans for Middle East or on China, I don't think that too much. In the Middle East, Russia is weakening its positions. Iran is also in dire straits. So I think it will be very hard for Putin to convince Trump that actually he may be useful in any way. That's my first point. My second point, I don't worry about Trump's ability to negotiate. He really knows how to do that. And there is, definitely the one condition he would address to Putin is, don't invade Ukraine again under my clock. So at least this, so that we can be sure, because Trump would definitely try to avoid a kind of the Afghanistan, scenario under his term. So if he offers any kind of deal, it should be stable at least for 4 years. And I don't think it would be enough for Putin, because if we look at Putin's demands, what he wants from Ukraine is not only, giving up its territory. It's not only giving up its, hopes for future. He wants to demilitarize Ukraine. So he wants to, institutionalize a permanent Russian threat on Ukraine. I don't think that Trump would agree on that. Exactly for the reasons I mentioned before.
Pastor Volker,
Okay.
final word to you.
I think we've covered almost everything,
Yep.
so I'm not going to repeat. I do want to say something on personnel as well, because I emphasize this perhaps more than Paula does, that Trump likes to have different people around him. He even prides himself on building a coalition of different types of people, but he sees himself as the only decision maker. So you can have Marco Rubio or Tulsi Gabbard or whomever. Trump is going to be the one that decides what to do. Second, I would say that I look at his appointments and I see them in three categories. I see those meant to be reassuring to the world and to markets, such as the Treasury Secretary, the Secretary of State, the National Security Advisor, the CIA Director. Those are all credible people and good nominations and reassuring. The second category is what I would call the red herrings. These are the things that you can use to distract the Democrats in the Congress and the media to get them to attack. And this is what happens with Matt Gaetz. I think Tulsi Gabbard is in that category. I don't think Trump minds one way or the other if they get confirmed, but he likes having the distraction. And then the third category are the people who he sees as the real reformers, the hardcore radical reformers of the deep state. And some of them are not even going to be in the government, Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy, but he wants to empower them to make recommendations. And others in that category would be Kash Patel and for FBI, Pam Bondi for Attorney General, RFK for health. These are things that I think he wants to deliberately disrupt. And so I see those things in that category. And as Paula said in an earlier meeting today, he's actually picking people that are suited to those tasks. So it is a bit of an alignment of what his policy goals are with the people that he's choosing. On the question about Article 5, you need to not restrict what Article 5 means. You need to define what it applies to. And it would apply to territory that the government of Ukraine controls. And territory that is occupied by Russia, Ukraine would make a commitment not to pursue its restoration militarily, but through diplomatic and political and other means. And NATO would not extend Article 5 to occupied territory. There is a precedent for this in Germany, where West Germany was brought into NATO in 1955, and Eastern Germany had a separate government imposed on it by the Soviet Union. And we lived with that for 40 years. In Germany's constitution, it was a goal of the West German state that unification with the rest of Germany was a permanent part of German policy. But because it was not acted upon militarily, we could apply Article 5 to West Germany.
Did you have a very quick, okay. We could honestly have this conversation for another hour, but I think we've reached the end of the conversation. So please, would you join me in thanking our wonderful panelists? There is also a reception right out that door. So please join us for some snacks and drinks before you all head out into the cold to go home. Thank you.